A very good morning to all of you. I'm actually quite happy to see a number of familiar faces here in the room. I spent quite some time with this group of startups here who came to Gaborone for the Botswana Up Startup Connect Week. And I'm actually very happy that today we're going to have an event with SADC. Because even though there are participants here from Zambia, from Namibia, from Zimbabwe, many of you are doing business with Malawi, with Angola, nobody spoke about SADC last week. SADC was just not present. And I think that's pretty wrong, because it's not only because Gaborone is the headquarter of the SADC Secretariat, but SADC also has a role to play for doing business in the region. But somehow we don't feel SADC in Botswana. It's not in our hearts, not in our minds, and it's not in our pockets. When I'm saying this, I'm of course thinking of the European Union as well, because there was a time when people did not really identify with the European Union, but only when we had free travel without any passport, visa restrictions across Europe, we could set up business wherever we wanted in the European Union. And of course, we had a one currency. That's how people started to feel integration, to feel regional integration. So this is somehow the dream I have for SADC, that one day when you come to Gaborone, you will say, hey, this is the headquarter of SADC, and we're all part of it. Our idea with this event was not only to make a difference for the ecosystem in Botswana, but to connect all of you to markets and to regional players. I'm personally wearing a double hat. I'm the German ambassador to Botswana, but I'm also the special representative to SADC. So we cover both, and my colleagues, I'm looking at Annelene, and GIZ colleagues in the room, they are the ones to work basically on the SADC portfolio. Today, it's actually a start to make startups a subject of regional integration as well. And we are very happy, Dr. Sibanda, that SADC has agreed to play a role. And thank you also, Madam, that you are here on behalf of the government of Botswana. Botswana has the reset agenda, so digitization is all over the place. Germany supports it, the European Union supports it, and I think it will be important to connect the subject of digitization with all the departments in SADC. It's not going to be an easy task, because people have to think out of the box, and they have to be flexible, agile, creative. They have to be like startups are, actually. And that's not going to be easy, but we are all here to support them. A number of countries of the SADC region and founded Southern African Connected Hubs. So there is a possibility to connect to this already. And of course, since last week, we have a GIZ program on startups as well. The GIZ Make IT in Africa program, which is a regional program. So far it was active in Western Africa and in Eastern Africa. We have a representative, Anna Wambe, who's actually based in Namibia, with us this morning. And now they have come to Southern Africa as well. They don't have a mandate to work with SADC, but who knows, maybe there's a possibility to do it and to connect the dots, because I think in a way this is what we're all doing, connecting the dots. So today, let's be practical. let's look into what SADC has to offer for startups. There's a protocol on trade and services which came into effect in January this year, and maybe this is something that could be interesting for all of your businesses. Let's have this event as a starting point for a more continuous engagement in all of our countries, here in Botswana, in Namibia, in Zambia, wherever you come from. And let's not leave SADC to the elderly politicians. Make it yours. Thank you.
The government of Botswana, through the Ministry of Trade and Industry, is committed to creating an enabling business environment. It is critical that startups in Botswana and in other SADC countries do look beyond their borders for the growth of their business. This is where the value of regional cooperation and market integration comes in. The SADC region provides a bigger and wider market for startups than the market size of individual SADC member states.
We have recently signed the rules of engagement with the SADC Business Council, and these were approved at the highest policy-making organ of the SADC, which is the Council of Ministers. What does it tell us? It tells us that SADC is not only for the public sector. It is a SADC which involves the private sector. It is a SADC which involves the non-state actors in their various forms, NGOs, civic society, labor organizations.
Under the SADC Protocol on Trade and Services, Botswana has made important commitments leading to liberalization of all 6 services sectors. They include the communications, constructions, energy-related, financial, tourism, and transport services. It shows one of our member states is already committed to transpose or to implement the provision of this protocol, and I'm sure it's also happening across the SADC member states.
The Business Council is made up of 16 national chambers of commerce and the 6 regional business associations across Southern Africa. It is mandated by the private sector to be the prime partner to the public sector, influencing policy making with regards to market access, industrialization, value chain development, and socio-economic development at a regional, continental, and at a global level. We work closely with the SADC Secretariat, national and regional sector bodies, governments, regional economic communities, multilateral groups, and the business community to improve the region's trade and investment climate. The main role of the Business Council is to involve the national business associations, regional business associations in SADC, and other stakeholders, including corporates and international chambers of commerce and SADC decision-making processes to drive the implementation of SADC plans and priority programs, promote knowledge and information sharing between SADC and the private sector, and to bring in private sector expertise, experience, viewpoints, and perspectives in SADC policy-making processes.
When you think about services, think about what you're doing in your private lives. Everything that you do touches on services, whether you go to the bank, when you swipe, every time you pick up your mobile phone, every time you go on the internet, every time you hire a taxi, every time you go to the shops. Everything that you do there involves the supply of services, even going to the hairdressers, although I think I have to be... I don't think I need to go to the hairdresser very often, but where you do, then you're also consuming a service. Okay, so that's in your private life. But in your business life, you're also consumers of services. So if you're an SME or a startup business, you're always going to need support services, whether you need to go to your accountant, your finance department, whether you need to organize transport, whether you need to organize or outsource marketing of your products, advertising and distribution, all of those services, you as a startup or a small business, and I'm using my words carefully based on what the ambassador kindly said at the end, But you are consumers of services. Now, you're establishing new businesses, and you want to make your businesses the very best. So if you're a consumer of a service, you want the very best services to make your business the best it can be. Because otherwise, you're giving mileage to your competitors. So you want the very best. Where do you get the very best from? It may not be in your home country. It may be across the border. It may be in South Africa. It may be Zambia. It may be Zimbabwe. It may be wherever you can find good supply of high quality services, you want them. And what you don't want is trade barriers getting in the way of you being able to obtain those services across borders. And many countries, surprisingly, although maybe not surprisingly, for various reasons regulate services. And some countries will regulate services in a way legitimately that protects domestic industry. But every time you regulate the service to protect industry, you're denying your own service consumers the very best that they can get from around the region. And the protocol is there to try and address these trade barriers by encouraging, through negotiations, the SADC member states to gradually remove them between each other to increase trade.
Trade in services is the sale or purchase of anything intangible, something that you can't drop to your feet. That is something that is done to you or your property. So I'll give you examples of how one can supply services in the region. The first mode, mode 1, is cross-border supply. So this takes place when a service is produced in one country, let's say Botswana, but consumed in another, South Africa, for example, with the supplier and consumer remaining in their respective countries. An example of this mode of supply would be Barata attorneys, which would be based in Botswana, a law firm, can draft and deliver a sales contract to McDonald's in South Africa through email. The second mode, mode 2, would be consumption abroad. This is where a consumer in one country travels to a different country to consume a service there. For example, a Comorian traveling to the Chobe National Park, which is here in Botswana, to consume tourism services. The third mode now is commercial presence. Now this mode takes a form of direct investment, a physical establishment of a business in a country, in another country to provide services there. An example of this mode would be Lesego Holdings Limited, Botswana, which is a microfinancing company based here in Botswana, may open a branch in DRC, for example. And the last mode, mode 4, is the presence of natural persons. This particular mode involves temporary movement of a service supplier from their country to another, specifically to provide a service. An example of this would be a neurologist from Zambia could come to Botswana to provide medical services at Gaborone Private Hospital.
Can I then ask, when exactly did the protocol enter into force, and is it binding on all member states? And just for an explanation on what the protocol is and what has entered into force to this point.
We started with trade in goods. We wanted the goods to be moving from one country to other without tariffs. And that was achieved in 2008 when SADC became a free trade area, which meant that all tariffs and the goods could just be flowing from one country to the other. But at some stage, once we were in SADC FTA, we realized that things were not moving. And we thought, no, there must be something wrong. Why are countries not trading? For you to trade, you need to produce. For you to produce, you need energy. And after you produce, you must transport your goods from one location to the other.
even if it means cross-border. For you to do that, you have to transfer funds from one country to the other. And you must have a very good communication infrastructure. So those are the areas we sought to know. We forgot about these areas. And these are services sectors that are meant to support trade. Now the next question is, what do we do? Initially, services should have been an annex in the protocol on trade. But because of the role of services to support trade, it was felt that there is a need to come up with a standalone protocol on trade in services, focusing on the 6 sectors that were prioritized, because that was urgent. We did not take all the sectors, but it was felt that there was a need to prioritize negotiation in the 6 services sectors because of the role they play to support the facilitation of movement of goods across borders. The protocol came into force in January this year, and the provisions of the protocol, once you have ratified the protocol, it becomes part of your national law, and it's binding to all the member states that have ratified that protocol. That's why it entered into force, because it's binding. What is quite good here is that anyone, if you want, as a service provider, you want to provide a service in Zambia and you're from Botswana, it's just to go to the commitment that Zambia has undertaken under the service sectors that you are interested, to look at them and then play the games as it is in the schedules of commitment.
I was very intrigued by this map, and the examples you gave, Madam, were really very good. Now, I was wondering, the guy from Comoros who comes to Botswana for tourism, does he need a visa? How easy is it to travel? And then the other example, the guy who is a doctor coming from Zambia to work for Gaborone Private Hospital, or let's assume that he's a doctor from Zimbabwe, how long does it take for him to get a work permit and to get a residence permit? Does the protocol address this as well, and how will these problems be solved?
We want to know exactly what the protocol says and what it means to us young business owners or business owners on the continent. What does the protocol mean and say? Malcolm?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you. The protocol, as we've been saying, it's a new instrument, and it has taken quite some time to get to the point where member states have brought it into force. So it's got to be seen as a mechanism for building progress towards the opening that the ambassador has drawn attention to. And I think this is really important, that we see that the role of the protocol is to create, in effect, a kind of a ratchet arrangement. So gradually, the member states will make commitments and they'll be binding. And then from the next level of negotiation, that next stage will be binding, and so on. And gradually, the opening up will be legally enforceable, but on a gradual basis, as Viola in a moment is going to talk about progressive liberalisation. That's the language that's used in the protocol. But before I pass the microphone to her, let me just briefly say the whole point of the protocol is to eventually create a single market for services across the SADC region. This is not the only initiative that's taking place in Africa. You'll also be aware of a similar process taking place across the whole of Africa under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and that is to be based on what the regional economic communities, and SADC is one of those, has been able to achieve as a building block towards that outcome. A key feature of the protocol is the most favoured nation treatment principle, and this is abbreviated to MFN, most favoured nation. What it means is that around the SADC region, whatever one country does in terms of providing access to the markets, every other SADC member state is entitled to the best of what is being offered by each member state. So as somebody said to me, and my colleagues have heard this many, many times, so I like the analogy, but if you buy one person a beer, you have to buy everybody a beer, and it has to be the best in the shop, in the bar. So that is the concept of most favoured nation. It's right at the heart. It doesn't matter whether this is part of the market access commitments that are scheduled, even what you do in the day-to-day operation of your national laws, you have to provide the best access for everybody in SADC, and that's now legally enforceable. The right to regulate is the other key area, because as Sharon was saying, services, you can't touch services, but they're always there, as I was explaining earlier. So you can't take poor services back. If for example, you hire a courier to deliver your tender documents, and they're supposed to be delivered by 10 o'clock the following morning, or else your bid will not be accepted, and the courier fails. I know this is not a precise example, but it means then that you can't then turn the clock back, or you can't get your money back, or you can't redress the problem because you've missed the opportunity of that tender. It's not like buying a television where if it fails, you can take it back to the shop and get it replaced. So services need to be regulated. You need to be reliant on banks being able to look after your money while you've deposited. You need to be able to rely on an insurance company to pay out if you make a claim. And all these rights that you have as a consumer of services are enshrined in the way that services are regulated. But you can also have anti-competitive practices by companies, and the protocol tries to address these by making monopolies and exclusive business practices. The idea is that they're supposed to discourage these, and we have, through the protocol, enhanced them through some of the regulatory principles that have been developed.
From what I've been listening to this morning, we are trying to encourage free trade amongst the SADC countries. However, you have a situation where Botswana closes borders for a foreign product. Now, this is a very, very tricky area because the government is trying to promote and establish the market locally. However, now it's closing off the guys from South Africa, from Zimbabwe. Now, how do you deal with a situation like this? Because you can understand the implications on either side. Now, as SADC, how do you try to create a market environment for both the locals and the foreigners?
What does the protocol speak to, or how does the protocol speak to the incentives of wanting to come and work for any SADC or set up within any SADC region? We know if you want to go and work in a place like Dubai, you've got incentives. So how does the protocol speak to at least guidelines of saying to the SADC countries, these are the guidelines of wanting to incentivize cross-border regional business startup,
Progressive liberalization hopefully doesn't mean slow, but rather we seek to challenge the barriers with an exponential and speedy decrease of barriers to trade in services. So I just like to put that forward.
The thing is, it has taken longer than I think maybe we expected for this negotiation for market access commitments to reach the point now where the protocol has come into force this year. We started many, many years ago, and to begin with, there wasn't a lot of experience amongst the member states about how to go about a negotiation involving the services sector. There's lots of experience in trade ministries relating to trade in goods. You know, you can do tariff negotiations. But the level of experience that existed at the time when I came into when we came into the project was low, and a lot of the early stages of the work that we did in the project was to help the member states to become better trade in services negotiators. And I think we've definitely achieved that over the period that this has taken place, because it now means that the member states have got more experience, more confidence. And by having those things, it means they can negotiate faster than they did in the early stages. While we've said that every member state has the right to regulate, in the context of the negotiation setting, it means that member states are talking to each other, they're making requests to each other, saying, thank you for your initial offer, but we'd like to see some improvements here. And the nature of the improvements, or the willingness to make improvements, is also, I think, a factor of the negotiating environment, because where one country is willing and another country is not, there's pressure on the unwilling country to become less unwilling. And so you find that process has generated more commitments than would have been if you just left everybody to their own devices. And when one country makes a commitment, let's say that they will grant majority foreign ownership in a joint venture instead of the 49% minority, maybe if one country does that, it incentivizes other countries to do the same. So you can see there's a dynamic. It's not just applying the right to regulate and sticking by it. There is a dynamic in the negotiation that leads to a higher level of liberalization than would be achieved without having it as a negotiation. So now, just picking up on the incentive point, the protocol doesn't provide incentives per se. There's no tax advantages or anything like that in the free trade area. But what it does do, you as businesses looking for new opportunities, every new opportunity involves some kind of investment, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's people. And you can choose where to put your investment, and you can choose where not to put it. And if a country says, we guarantee these are the terms in which we will allow you to enter the market, and we will not make these more restrictive in the future, compare that with another country that says we wish to remain totally what we call unbound, which means free of any legal obligation to enforce a particular standard of market access. You as an investor are going to go into the country that provides the guarantees because it provides you with the certainty that your investment is going to be protected.
The protocol also recognizing that the services that are to be provided, as Sharon told us, it could be that you establish a branch, it could be that you send a person, a natural person, to go and provide the service. We had Ambassador talking about what happens when the doctor wants to move to Botswana to provide the medical services. So sometimes the countries, as they regulate the services, no one wants to have bogus professionals to provide the service. You need government to be there to make sure these people who are coming to provide the services, be it a bank, be it a person, is the person that is qualified. So in doing so, sometimes government tend to overregulate, and sometimes they refuse to accept the qualification that you present as a medical doctor. So there's a gatekeeper in the medical regulatory body that will say, let us see how you obtained your medical degree. So because in the region, we also have another protocol which provides how people should be trained to make sure that they have the right skills to provide the services, to provide their skills in the community for the purposes of development and regional integration. We also want to see how these qualifications that are obtained from one member state to another are recognized and accepted. And when can it not be accepted? So if it is not accepted, then what do I do? Because I've passed maybe the university, and now you're telling me you can't accept my qualification. What do I do? So the protocol provides for a process of making sure which one will be agreed or will be accepted as equivalent to what is provided in Botswana or in another country. And it also provides for a rigorous process or a development that you need to do so that your qualification can be upgraded and therefore you can provide the service that you need to provide. Another principle that the protocol also provides for is that, as you heard, the ambassador was, okay, I will be coming, I have my qualification, you can accept it. But can I come in? What are the conditions? Do I need visa or don't I need visa? So the protocol provides for what we call a progressive liberalization principles. When we talk about liberalizing in trading services, like we said, it's not like where goods are moving across the customs, so you put a border, they cannot come unless they meet this criteria. For services is where you have someone coming in and then they will provide the service. So at the time that you're authorizing this to be a doctor that can establish a hospital, a clinic, or can treat a patient, then this person is already in the country, and you can only stop to say you cannot do this because of 1, 2, 3, 4. So at that time, when the regulations have been put in place, we now say, if you are really allowing everybody to be able to provide these services, provided they have the right qualification, provided they have a license, provided they have all the requirements that you would have put in place, we have 6 things that would say, if you liberalize the market, then let's not see this as one of the requirements. 1, allow as many people, that is the number of service providers, allow them to the extent that the market is able to accept them. So do not regulate or do not put a requirement which says it's only 1 service provider that will be allowed, because the market will dictate. If the market needs 5, then the market is saturated. Even if you try to provide the service, you will not be able to do that. But also, you could get a license to provide the service, but then you are unable to keep up with the competition. So some of the businesses, we had Peter telling us, some of the startups, they will start and fail. Probably it's because they were not able to keep up with the market. We are saying, let the business do, because they are the ones to start the market and they know what type of services are required. So let them assess the market and determine what number of branches according to what the market dictates. Also, there are countries that would say, because they do not want so many service providers, they would say, okay, how do we make sure that only Botswana are able to provide this service? Then they will say, what we do, of course it's also good. We would say, okay, if you come to provide services in Botswana, you must partner with a local for capacity building and for other reasons. Then they will put a cap to say, what is the ownership, the percentage of the capital that you need to put in? So to the extent that this is possible, we are saying allow to the extent that a person who is investing is able to control the business. And how do you control? If you're not an owner of the business or you don't own enough stake, then you will not be able to control the investment. So we are trying to say, even if you require partnership and joint ventures, but the percentage should allow the service providers from other countries, should encourage them to be able to control their investment. So do not limit the foreign capital participation. Also, in some sectors, they would say, for you to provide this type of service, you need to have this form of establishment. You can only provide this service if you have, for example, I will take air transport, which we all know. You're saying, for you as South Africa Express Airways, you cannot provide air transport services unless you establish a company here. So how do you establish? Sharon told us you can establish a branch. You can also open a representative office so that when they refuse to take me in the airline, then I go and say somewhere that I had this challenge. Or they can say, you need to have what we call a subsidiary company, which is a full-fledged, which will be controlled here. For example, in banking sector, this is very common. So we are saying, to the extent that this is not necessary in the sector, then allow the businesses, the private sector, to determine the type of legal entity they want to establish. So it should not be applied in all the sectors equally, depending on the sector for prudential reasons, because sometimes you say we need to control even your finances, therefore, especially in the financial sector, because we want to see your accounts and make sure you're not taking the money here and take it somewhere. So we are putting, some regulations to make sure you're not misusing this. So the last one now is, after you have allowed and after you have removed all these requirements, then we say, once the service provider, the medical doctor is in Botswana, then give them equal rights and equal responsibilities as private sector. Treat them as you would treat the nationals. So we call it national treatment. There should be no discrimination because this bank is from South Africa and not Botswana, so they are supposed to do this and the other ones are not doing that. We are saying they're in the market, they are servicing the same customers, let the same regulation apply to all of them.
We are celebrating World IP Day this year. And why is it important this year? I think the reason why it's important this year is the theme. And the theme of World IP Day 2022 focuses on youth and the importance of youth And that for the continent of Africa is even more important, seeing that over 60% of the youth of Africa, or the population of Africa, is under the age of 25. And so the youth have got an incredible and largely untapped source of creativity and ingenuity. We also realize that the youth have got huge opportunities to help the continent to leapfrog based on certain tools and education, digital tools that have been made available. There's fresh perspectives that we see every day as we interact with the youth and the various startups across the continent. There's a level of curiosity which is very critical for innovation to be able to take place, and indeed for intellectual property to come out. It's important when one talks about intellectual property and protection of one's intellectual property within a business to adopt a holistic approach. So just because you've protected it by way of a patent, it does not mean that you cannot use a design as well, design registration. You can also use trademark for the particular product, and there is copyright as well embedded in the different forms. So one needs to take a holistic approach. And I think effective IP management is very critical. You need to know what assets you've got as a business. And when you are being acquired or when you are being funded, there's venture VC funding discussions. People would want to know what is your intellectual property.
The creative industry is such that you can take your creativity and land it in Zambia and extrapolate it from there. It has not been easy because, one, it's not taken seriously. At home, when I started radio, they thought I was joking. They thought, it's a side thing, she'll be done with it in a few years and, she'll move on. 23 years down the line, I'm still doing this and it's feeding my kids. So the industry is very slow in moving towards realizations like that. Funding for a creative industry is something that only now in 2022 we are discovering how, what we need as businesses to kind of get that going.
I can so much relate to what Tsepo is sharing in the sense of getting into a market that is very new or tapping into a service that is very new. I am fully in tourism. There's so much gap within our industry, the tourism industry. Africa as a whole is known for safari. If you ask someone from the US, from Germany, from the UK, who are our main market, and say, what do you know about Botswana? They will tell you about the Chobe, they will tell you about the Okavango. I couldn't get funding, I couldn't get funding because everybody was saying, why would someone come to Botswana and learn how to milk a cow? Why would someone come to Botswana and just come for the food or just come to be with the local people? But because it's something that I experienced and something that I believe in, I decided that, whether the funding is there or not, I will push. Because of so much red tape and, the turnaround time is so long, I knew where the gaps are. I love travel. And I love traveling solo, and I'm a female, and you know what it's like when you travel solo and you're a female. So I wanted to create a safe space for female solo travelers, and those were actually my biggest market.
I always had the idea of venturing into food. I knew that there was a certain happiness that I experienced when I produced something, and somebody actually said, hey, there was always something as a kid. So growing up, I always said, I have to follow this path. So the minute I decided to take that leap and now focus on my hobby and turning it into a business, I think that's when I just realized that now this is what I needed. This is good because my dad's saying, but no, the money must be invested, buy equipment, do whatever. But nobody actually said to me, are you doing these things? Are you growing your business in such a way?
The challenges that you face they're not peculiar to women entirely. What you have in terms of you being a cook and you knowing what you do is what I have a challenge with. I'm an accountant. So my business, accounting. It doesn't make me a best marketer. It doesn't make me the best legal person. It doesn't make me the best HR person. So you have the same problem, right? And ideally, the main thing that we need to do is collaboration, and collaboration doesn't entirely always mean form a formal partnership of I'm with Tepo, now we own the whole company. It's about, can you understand the value chain within what you're doing? Can I go to her and say, can you come and do content creation for my company, and then go to the next person? And we actually do trade exchanges.
I think it's time we embrace creativity in formal sectors and industries. So it's quite an interesting proposition that you put through, because the processual aspect actually is what we need, then the creative, which is then the innovation, right? But what are we doing to create legacy and lasting enterprises is also what brings me into the room. The answer is, I don't know how. But I've also got many incarnation. I've tried manufacturing, truck and trailer manufacturing in Botswana. I don't feel in any way that our strategy has pivoted towards inclusion, to a point where our Citizen Economic Empowerment Program is the cornerstone is to co-create, the cornerstone is to develop the supplier base, to develop sustainable enterprises, to shift mindset. If we want to reduce and wean Botswana off dependency, then we need to capacitate them. And challenging even future legacy projects. One of the main challenges over and above youth is women. So again, I still don't have that answer to say what is on the women agenda. But all I know is it's not dependency. What I know is it's collaboration, it's networking, and pulling together.
I think we should also recognize that customs administrations around the world are really driving towards digitization, complete digitization. Majority of these administrations have systems now that can facilitate, this information system to system.
The private sector, startups play a big role because they develop such solutions for the government. The government makes sure that they're safe, and then they are offered by the private sector. So we would need to alert our tech guys, our tech entrepreneurs to say, don't wait for your government to produce such a system. See how you can solve this problem with a private sector solution, and drive the movement from the ground. And then what we need to do from the other side is make sure that the regulatory framework allows to actually make things easier.
Governments, in terms of automation from governments, there is quite a lot that can be done. And by providing a platform for automation of jobs, particularly those that are done by startup companies, that in its own could accelerate and create jobs, particularly for young people. That is one. Two, there is, if you look at the value chain of supporting jobs and roles across the entire sphere of startups, IP, contracting, legal issues, there is quite a lot of support that can be created.
This event showed that we need more events which enable dialogue, because no matter what the subject was and who was speaking, I always felt that everybody was really happy to have the opportunity, which is really maybe, for me personally, a clear signal which I didn't expect like that, and also which is maybe also the result of all these COVID restrictions which we all suffered from over the last 2 years. I would like to pay special tribute to the governments of the Federal Republic of Germany and also of the Republic of Botswana for the partnership in making the Botswana Startup Week possible. And in the same vein, I would like to pay special tribute to the SADC Secretariat for their willingness to scale up the Startup Week to a regional level.
Every business is bound to have challenges. We operate in South Africa, Lesotho and Namibia, and of course Botswana being our home country. As a courier company, everything that we bring in and out of the country has to be declared. One of our biggest challenges at the border is our waiting times. For example, our driver will leave Johannesburg around 10 and be at the border at around 2:30. But the driver will end up leaving the border to Botswana at around 6-8 p.m. There is quite a number of waiting times at the border, and even though we do pre-clear most of the goods that we bring in, we still have to queue like other normal passenger or freight vehicles. And we so wish we will get to a point where courier and logistics companies will be perceived as essential service and therefore given preferential service to save the time that we lose at the clearing or at the customs. We've lost about 2 cars to hijacking, and that of course comes with a huge cost because that means we've also lost the passenger parcels. Lesotho, our biggest challenge is the customer base. We have very few clients who want to send stuff to Lesotho, but we have a lot of stuff coming from Lesotho to Botswana, so which means most of the time our vehicles go there empty-handed, when in ideal it should be going there fully loaded and coming back fully loaded.
I think in going to these markets, what I've basically done is we've built an online profile in order to be able to be recognized, and that's how some of the work that we've gotten has been. We've managed to do some of the work within the region. I think there's also been through networking and events such as these, and also attending various sessions. The challenge is always, obviously, is around doing business, especially short-term projects in some of these countries, in terms of getting some of the issues such as your work permits, temporary work permits, and so forth. But I think obviously now, in trying to overcome those challenges, we've looked at how do we do a lot of business digitally, in order to be able to do business in these different countries.
We need to be able to know we can depend on the partner or the entity that's representing the business in the other country. And with this, the only way you can do it is through leveraging on partnerships or networks that will allow that transaction to happen with in a risk-free manner. And basically, that's making sure that we trust. There's a trust between the two entities in two different countries. And with that, there needs to be a lot of transparency in doing business and communication and trusting when I send my money to the other country that it will arrive, that my goods will actually arrive in a safe manner. And so what's very important in doing these cross-border trades is that there needs to be an element of trust and risk mitigation.
I would imagine our service providers sometimes might have issues, especially some issues are really about cash flows and being able to bear the burden of the cost of importing and exporting services. And I think up and until recently, one of the ways we're trying to capacitate is through the collaboration with the financial services sector, where the banks have really come on board as partners to our Citizen Economic Empowerment Program, and we accept things like, we accept sessions from the bank to say, you know what, people might need the funds to be able to do business across borders in order to provide us with services and goods. So, like I said, we are really a conduit, but recognizing that the startups wouldn't usually have the financial power or the capital or the startup or the cash flows. So how do we then make it possible, and how do we help them to be able to fund their businesses to do business both ways, export and import?
We need to tap onto the bigger market, which is the regional market, being the SADC region. And our ability to be able to be part and parcel of provision of services into this market is quite crucial in terms of the growth of the service that we are offering. And we also believe that what we are offering to the region is equally important in terms of adding value to the small, medium enterprises that we are targeting and providing our ERP software solution towards.
Our members are mainly youth and they're women, and they're operating hand-to-mouth businesses, but how do we empower them? How do we support them, capacitate them to build commercial businesses? And currently we have a situation where the government of Botswana is availing market. For example, we have a statutory instrument on the school uniform where the government of Botswana has banned the import of school uniform into the country. So that automatically means the women and youth who have machines, who have sewing machines, now have a chance to grow big. But they cannot do that because they do not have the collateral to get funding. So it's one of those challenges that we don't know how to go about it.
It is important that we develop or cultivate key skills within leaders who can be at the forefront and the very backbone of transformation. If your values can resonate with what is happening in other parts of the world, you show up not only to improve yourself, but to make a meaningful contribution. And that is where sustainability starts. It's not about a priority for a particular country, but it's to say, where are the skill sets that we can bring in? And this is about understanding the importance of being a global citizen, understanding the importance of diversity and inclusivity.